My fellow Australians, welcome. My name is John Andrews and welcome to Advancing Australia. This is my first show. It's been a long time coming for me. There's much to be done behind the scenes. I want to do a lot of researching and I really want to get this whole thing going because there's a lot to talk about in our country right now, a lot to talk about on the right. The right seem to have lost their voice, lost their cultural confidence, lost their ability to speak with clarity on the issues that are important. There are very, very few voices forthrightly speaking out, and I want to start that conversation. I'm going to talk with everybody, and we're going to do so very, very forthrightly. So today, I want to tell you a little bit about the show, about what we hope to achieve, and then I want to look at a couple of topical issues. This week was Australia Day, so I want to talk about the issues around Australia Day. There's a couple of issues with identity and Australian sport and where that's heading and the reporting on that. But then also there's another couple of issues like what happened at the Sydney Test with Cricket Australia more generally, Margaret Court, the Companion of the Order Australia Award, Australia Day more generally, and what this means for Australian nationalism, which is what I'm all about. And we won't get into the political philosophy of nationalism today. I really am going to break apart a lot of issues quite systematically in detail, because I don't think that anybody's doing that, like I said, in Australia from a right-wing conservative nationalist perspective. Okay, so before I get underway, actually, I just do want to tell a story. I got a cup of coffee the other day, and it was just before Australia Day, and I get up out of bed pretty early. Got a cafe just around the corner that opens pretty early, so I like to get up, go for a walk. Anyway, I wore my Trump hat because that's always fun. It's always a great way to start conversations with random people, and I like talking about politics. So I wore my Trump hat, and an older gentleman was in the coffee shop, and he came up to me and he said, "What do you think is going to happen with Trump? You know, do you think that Trump is going away?" And I told him that I didn't know what Trump was going to be doing. I mean, who knows? I mean, I don't think any of us have been able to predict from day to day or month to month or cycle to cycle what Donald Trump will do. So I think answering that a question would have been a bit pointless. But what I told him is that what I didn't think was going away was the right speaking out and fighting back. I didn't think that that was going away. And also I didn't think that nationalism was going away. I think that Trump really spoke for a long time about nationalism, for the first time in a long time about nationalism and the positive force of nationalism. And like I said, I will get into that in time. But I said, yeah, I didn't think that Trump was going away, that nationalism was going away and that nationalists weren't going anywhere. And he had a little bit of a think about that, and he sort of said, oh, that's good. We actually need our nationalists because the nation is important. And then he whipped a hat out of his pocket, and it was a black cap. And on the black cap, he had a little green triangle and a little logo that said the Greens. And he sort of laughed and he said, look, we're both on the opposite sides of these issues, but I'm glad we talked, and I'm glad we could find something to agree on. And we sort of shook hands, and he said, you know, have a great day. And I sort of said to him, absolutely, thank you, same to you, but make sure you enjoy tomorrow. And that obviously that next day that I'm referring to there was Australia Day, him being a Green. So we both had a bit of a chuckle at that. So I just wanted to share that anecdote with you to give you an example of how in everyday conversations we can advance our ideas, even just in some small way, have them acknowledged, and do so in a non-confrontational way that is, you know, respectful. Now, I'm not sure that anecdote would have gone the same way if that person was in their early 20s and was going to university and had dyed hair. I think that would have gone off the rails. And so that's another important reason to do the show, is to make sure that we can get the issues out there and engage in this cultural confidence right across the right, to embolden ordinary people like myself to to start to speak about these issues, because the education system will eventually swamp us just by sheer weight of numbers. And I'll have more to say on education later. There's a whole heap of things we can talk about there, but I won't. Okay, so that's the anecdote. So what is Advancing Australia? I wanted to start this show. Excuse me, I'm going to read some notes. I'm going to try and be conversational, but I've got 14 pages here and I really want to work through it. So if, you can see from the counter on the show, it's not going to be short. I wanted to start this show. I want to start a community to build upon the foundation of our ideas, the love of this country and its citizens, all of them, and to expound upon and spread our ideas. We've got a lot of problems in Australia to talk about. We have a lot of people in our nation now trying to sow division between the races, the sexes, the classes, and at the same time they're trying to push all sorts of sexual degeneracy and homonormativity onto our children. So by homonormativity, I basically mean the opposite of the critique that these ideologues have in talking about heteronormativity, that somehow the normality, the normalcy, the binary nature, the natural order of heterosexuality is somehow some sort of social construct that's incorrect, when the reality of the situation is that it's the projection and the propagandizing, the mainstreaming of homosexual norms that is actually a negative force in our society that divides people. And it's being pushed onto our children. So we see a strong preference for the foreign and the cosmopolitan, what I like to call xenophilia. I think this xenophilia is, again, a word that's used in opposition to xenophobia. We talk about restriction immigration, they scream xenophobe. You say let them in, let them stay in regard to migration, and I say xenophilia. This is the rejection of the concept of nationhood, of the integrity of the border, of the interests of the people, the demographic, the citizenry, the electorate of the nation in favour of the other, of the xeno. And we have the undermining of our culture and our cultural confidence through the news, the arts, the academies, the universities, the schools. It's sadly in some churches and in the government institutions, and also through literature. And if you've ever seen, we'll do another whole show on this, if you've got young children like I do, and you've ever taken them into a library, well, I do all the time, or to a bookstore, don't just buy them books. You have to read them, and it's a lot of work. They're just absolutely terrible. You really have to look at them. You have to see what your kids are reading. And we'll go into this in some detail in another show. I mean, there's so much material, there's so many things to talk about, no one's talking about them. Okay, so we're going to reinstall confidence in our culture by having discussions that the others, including mainstream conservative voices, are too afraid to have. This is the point. This is the main point. The main difference between us, I like to call Advancing Australia. We are paleo-conservative, we are reactionary, we are putting Australians first, versus the so-called conservatives, the insider class, who I don't think, and this is a bit of a universal catch cry you hear a lot, but it really is important. I don't think that they've conserved anything. They push green energy, gay marriage, a separate parliament for Aboriginal people. Talking about dividing Australia by race, we're going to have 3 tiers of parliament is being proposed by the Liberal government. We're going to get into that, federal government. I'm not going to get into that today, but there's so many topics. And I say they've never conserved anything. And I had a discussion on Twitter about a month ago with a leading, someone that I've been following for a little while now, who's really making a bit of a breakout on new media, on social media. And I asked them to give me an example of what conservatives have conserved of the last last cultural victory. And they cited the Howard government overturning the Northern Territory's euthanasia bill in 1997. So when I spoke to this person, the example of a cultural victory that the Conservatives have had was overturning a euthanasia bill, which the federal government has the power to do over a territory, the Northern Territory's euthanasia bill in 1997. It is 2021, and the example given to me of a major achievement of the Conservative movement was nearly 25 years ago. Right? Are you starting to get a sense of the scale of the problem? I've got a sense of that scale. We've got a lot of work to do. So we're different because we're prepared to say the things that our conservative and classical liberal compatriots won't say. Now, we have a lot of agreement. These people are our allies. What I think we should be doing is pushing these guys further to the right, and we should do that by giving them cultural confidence, by asking questions, by joining their political parties and pushing them right, because at the moment they're nowhere near right enough. So we do share their interests, but this is how we differentiate. Okay, this is it quite simply. We believe that the marriage is between a man and a woman because having a mother and a father gives children the best opportunity in life. Okay, the best opportunity in life. That's what the studies show. We know this inherently. We are parents ourselves. We are in relationships ourselves. We know what's best for our children when we parent. That the influence or encouragement of children to identify as transgender, to give them hormones or otherwise interfere in their natural development and maturity to the age of 21 should be a federal crime. I don't see anything controversial in that at all. Interfering in, there's a case actually in Queensland Supreme Court that was decided in December. I think it was December. I read the judgment 2 days ago, where the Supreme Court, not the family court, not a federal court, the Queensland Supreme Court, the highest state court in Queensland, has put I can't remember if it was a 12 or 13-year-old boy on, oh look, we're getting into the specifics, I want to just push through, putting him on hormone blockers. That's another show. I've got to stay on track here, I'm sorry about this. So they're the two things. The third thing is that we believe that abortion in all circumstances is morally wrong, and that there should be federal laws in Australia to enshrine legal personhood and legal rights from the moment of conception. Absolutely uncontroversial to me. So there's 3 points. Marriage between a man and woman, hormone blockers, influence or encouragement of children to identify as transgender should be a federal crime, legal personhood for the conceived, for the unborn, and also lastly that the age of small government is over. It's been a mantra in conservative circles in Australian politics to fixate on small government. It's insane because it's never going to happen. That's a cold war. Not only that, because the conservative governments that we had have never actually shrunk government. They've reduced the scale of its growth over time, like that's somehow an achievement that is in line with the goal of small government. But it's never happened, it's never going to happen, and the reality of the situation is that the left get into the institutions and then they run them, and the right won't do that because they see it as being antithetical, hypocritical to the mantra of small government. We can't interfere in something we don't believe in. Well, I tell you what, it's time to actually own the institutions. It's time for us to directly posit ourselves in those positions of power, in those instruments of the government, and to use them to propagate our ideas, because that's what the left have been doing since the 60s. For us to abandon the field because somehow conservatives have traditionally believed in small government is absurd. It doesn't even begin to take into account the reality of the situation. And like I said, that reality is that they've been taken over. If we don't do the same, we are going to get bulldozed by the institutions. And we're seeing that now with education. A great example would be, say, for example, the Safe Schools program of teaching, queer theory to children, that they can be whatever gender they want. And that has been put in the name of curbing bullying. That's how they use the institutions. What do? Oh, well, we've got to cut funding to that program. No, get in there, replace the people, teach the opposite, right? Very, very simple thing. But you can't do that if you believe in small government. If you believe in small government, you've already walked away from the concept, from the ability to use the instruments of the state to propagate your political goals, your social goals, and your values. Whereas the left do that all the time with impunity because they love government. So we've got to get involved. So yeah, what we need to say to the present batch of Conservatives that we need to push further right is get involved or get out of the way. We're going to replace you. So this is not a complete thesis, okay? That's just they're just the four main points that I see where we are different to classical liberals, classic conservatives. And these are ideas that I want to push into our political system. So it's a taste of what we're about. There'll be issues, we'll be able to discuss other issues, and this is the lens that we'll be using to discuss things. The critiques of the stories of the day or the week, and how it provides solutions through strength, confidence, moral clarity, and unlike conservatives or classical liberals, with the force of the law and state action. Like I said, again, the days of small government are over. We just need to admit it and move on. Move on. Okay, so let's look at the stories of the day. So I first mentioned Margaret Court. So who is Margaret Court? For a lot of you that are younger, even for myself, I never saw Margaret Court play tennis. She's one of only 3 players in history to have won the Grand Slam box set, consisting of every Grand Slam title, singles, doubles, mixed doubles. Okay. However, she's the only one in tennis history to complete a multiple Grand Slam set twice in all 3 of those disciplines. And uniquely, she won all 12 as an amateur, and then again, after a period of retirement, returned as a professional to win all 12 again. I mean, that's pretty serious tennis playing right there. I mean, we're pretty blessed. I don't mind a bit of tennis. We're pretty blessed at the moment with the current crop of tennis players we have. You know, you think Federer, Nadal. We had Andy Murray there for a time. It wasn't great, but it was good. Who's the other one I'm thinking of? Djokovic. God almighty. Looks like a Serbian war criminal, but gee whiz, he's a great tennis player. He sounds like a top bloke too. So she's one of only 6 tennis players ever to win multiple Grand Slams in 2 Grand Slam set in 2 disciplines. So I think that's the amateur and professional. And the International Tennis Hall of Fame, this is all from Wikipedia, says, quote, "For sheer strength of performance and her accomplishment, there has never been a tennis player to match her," end quote. So on the Saturday, the 23rd of January, the news of her elevation from office to the Order of Australia to a companion of the Order of Australia, which is the highest level, was leaked, and a concerted campaign against her and her normal, healthy Australian values began. In 5 days, 7 articles were produced by the ABC to push back, and they attacked Margaret Court for daring to push back on the culture of homonormativity that we discussed earlier. Here are some of the headlines. Former ABC journalist Kerry O'Brien rejects Australia Day honour in protest over Margaret Court award. Canberra doctor returns OAM in protest against Margaret Court 2021 Australia Day honour. Margaret Court defends her beliefs after Australia Day honour controversy. Controversy, right? Premier criticises Australia Day honour. Margaret Court returns serve. I mean, this is the quality of our headlines. Absolute clickbait. Race to the bottom. We get $1.1 billion a year for this quality. Margaret Court defends right to religious freedom of speech, slams media over the 2021 Australia Day honours leak. Okay. Daniel Andrews condemns Margaret Court's inclusion in Australia Day honours list. Daniel Andrews, Mark McGowan oppose Australia Day honour for tennis player legend Margaret Court because of her LGBT views. So here's a sample of some of the quotes from the articles. Margaret Court was a great tennis player who thrilled most Australians in her tennis years, including me, but her hurtful and divisive criticisms relating to the fundamental rights of the LGBTQ+ community are clearly repugnant to many Australians. What crimes is Margaret Court, a great Australian woman, What crimes is Margaret Court, a great woman, 3-time Grand Slam winner and minister of a Perth Pentecostal church, accused of? What's all this about? Hurtful and divisive comments. Hurtful. That is the lowest possible bar imaginable in a society, to criticise someone that they've hurt you. That's what you do in relationships. That's what you do with your friends. That's what you do in families. That's not a public policy level of analysis that's even suitable for debate. Quote, Ms. Court has described homosexuality as, quote, an abominable sexual practice, end quote, and wrote an open letter in 2017 saying she would boycott Qantas over its support of same-sex marriage. Quote, I teach what the Bible says about things and you get persecuted for it, she said in an ABC interview last year. End quote. Well, isn't that prophetic? That's exactly what happened to her this week is what she said would happen to her. In 2013, she wrote a letter to the editor of a newspaper lamenting the birth of Australian tennis player Casey Delacroix's child in a same-sex relationship. Quote, it is with sadness that I see that this baby has seemingly been deprived of a father, end quote, Miss Court wrote. It is with sadness that I see this baby has seemingly been deprived of a father. That is a hurtful and divisive comment, according to the ABC. Apart from it being factually correct that the baby has seemingly been deprived of a father, that seems to be factually correct. Nobody's saying that that's not in effect. Ms. Court is saddened by that. That's hurtful and divisive, that she has expressed an emotion. That's the level of analysis, is it? That's the critique. That's what's caused all the controversy. Okay, so I point out that the news of the award was leaked. Okay, so a coordinated media campaign, as you saw, that was just one publication. You could look at The Guardian, you could look at the Sydney Morning Herald, you could probably even look at News Limited, news.com.au, who are absolutely the most appalling left-wing clickbait I've ever read. Amongst it, it's dreadful dross. So that began. But what's interesting to me is that the selection committee made a very, very gutsy decision to around the controversy of Margaret Court. You even think back to the Australian Open last year, where John McEnroe and Martina Navratilova came out and said that, you know, Margaret Court, the arena should be renamed and all this. I mean, we started taking moral advice from John McEnroe. I'm old enough to can remember that my parents had to turn the TV down when he played tennis because of the way he used to erupt and carry on and scream and swear. We're now taking moral lectures from this guy. Is that what's going on here? insane. So what's more amusing is that we have a coordinated campaign. We have a very, very strong and very gutsy decision by the awards committee to grant this award to Margaret Court. What's interesting to note is that the Prime Minister would have had full awareness of this award. He would have been fully aware weeks before, as Margaret Court would have been, weeks before that this award was coming. What did the Prime Minister, what did the Australian government, what did its senior members, what did its backbenchers have to say in defence of Margaret Court and her values? What did they have to say? Nothing. Nothing. A defence of the heterosexual family would have been pretty good, would have been pretty based. A strong defence for Margaret Court's freedom of conscience and to argue in the public sphere for her beliefs, to defend her charitable works within the Perth Pentecostal community. That would have been good. Anything. But instead, silence. Okay, so this is the difference between us and Conservatives. This is where we need to replace Conservatives, and this is where we need to push Conservatives further to the right. It's despicable that they would do nothing and say nothing, knowing full well what would have happened, knowing when the decision was leaked what was going to come over the next few days. That they're all media professionals. Absolutely nothing. They would have known that well in advance. Margaret Court knew well in advance what was coming, and she wrote it out with enormous dignity. And so there's a lot of work to be done. Now, I want to move on to Cricket Australia because it's all linked. So now we have another sporting body. I mean, if you recall last year, the Tennis Australia didn't stand by Margaret Court. They defended naming the arena after her, but that was about it. Anyway, Cricket Australia. So we're going to go right back now to the Sydney Test. So what's that, 2-3 weeks ago? I'm sure you remember the press coverage of the alleged racism allegedly displayed by the crowd on the 4th day of the Sydney Test. Okay, so earlier this week, the Sydney Morning Herald published an article entitled "India Walk-Off Threat Emerges as Cricket Australia Clears Men Ejected from SCG." That's the headline. It says, quote, "A Cricket Australia report has cleared 6 men ejected from their seats during the Sydney Test of racially abusing Mohammad Siraj. As it emerged, the Indian team had refused to keep playing until action was taken over their complaints to umpires. According to sources with knowledge of Cricket Australia's investigation into crowd behaviour in Sydney, the game's governing body believes Indian players were subject to racial taunting from beyond the boundary. Cricket Australia interviewed multiple Indian players about claims they were vilified by members of the crowd during the 3rd Test from January 7 to 11. The investigation also took in witness accounts from spectators, among them people who contacted Cricket Australia to volunteer what they saw and heard during the match. The findings of the Cricket Australia probe have now been sent to the International Cricket Council, which gave Cricket Australia 14 days to lodge a report. The report says while they believed players had been racially abused, Cricket Australia investigators were unable to identify the culprits. Cricket Australia, which is waiting a final report from New South Wales Police, is satisfied that the 6 men who were walked out of the lower tier of the Clive Churchill and Barongal stand by police on the 4th afternoon of the Test did not make remarks of a racial nature to players. Their removal occurred after rookie fast bowler Siraj approached umpires Paul Rifle and Paul Wilson, alleging he had been abused by spectators seated in the area behind where he was stationed on the rope. The game was stopped for more than 10 minutes as the umpires twice walked over the boundary to talk to security guards where Siraj had been fielding. Sources now say the Indian players had warned on the ground that they wouldn't resume play until their complaint was acted upon. A group of 4 men and 2 others sitting in front of them were soon after ushered from their seats by officers before leaving the venue of their own accord. following interviews in the grounds police room, end quote. Also, finally, the article also states, Krishna Kumar also said a group of young men in the crowd had called him and members of the Indian team curry munchers on the third day of the test. Right? So I was listening, there's a lot to be said about this. So I was listening to the test match during the time, okay, on ABC Grandstand, that the allegation had been made by, or was made by Siraj. As has been reported that some in the crowd, yes, someone in the crowd had said, "Welcome to Sydney, Shiraz." That is what, according to many eyewitnesses, according to social media, the court of public opinion, because no details have been released by police, no details have been released by Cricket Australia, all we have to go on is social media. So what the great crime of racism that stopped the game for 10 minutes, that allowed the Indian players to threaten not to continue their participation in a game that they were losing, was, I believe it was a draw. They weren't doing well. Was that they welcome to Sydney, Shiraz, and also that the day before someone in the crowd had called members of the Indian team curry munchers. Devastating. Devastating. The things that go on in this country. Absolutely. Wow. So I was appalled when this happened. I was absolutely appalled. And I'll tell you why I was appalled. ABC Grandstand coverage went straight to talking about how racist and disgusting Australian crowds are. That Australian crowds were terrible, this was revolting, and this was totally unacceptable. That the worst thing in Australia that you could be was a racist. They went on to say that this was, quote, definitely, end quote, a racist incident. Okay? Now, I don't have a transcript to play you, to read you. I don't have any material recorded because you can't find it anywhere, this appalling behaviour. I know because I heard it. I love cricket and I see the institution, the game, and I think many Australians love the game being diminished. And we'll get onto that in a moment, actually. They had no evidence to say anything that they had said about the crowd. They had none. They just moved straight to demeaning their fellow citizens as being disgusting racists, and that's a quote there, without a shred of evidence presented to them. No evidence. No evidence at all presented. In fact, here we go. So the next day, the Sydney Morning Herald reported an eyewitness, directly quoting, "I don't know why they, the New South Wales Police, kicked the men out. Next thing you know, you see police everywhere. It didn't make sense. It was confusing." That's somebody right there on the ground. Also, the same evening as the incident occurred, New South Wales Police apologised to the 6 people it had ejected. Okay? They were reported as having left voluntarily. They reported that, and New South Wales Police apologised for ejecting them. Right? This stands in direct opposition to the coverage of the ABC. The ABC commentators on ABC Grandstand, as this was happening, without any evidence, said, they went so far as to say, with everything going on, the crowd really should feel lucky to be here. So everything going on at that time is referring to the COVID-19 clusters that were, I think there's one in Western Sydney, one up around Avalon, Northern Beaches. Lots of risk of Sydney being locked up. I hate the term locked down, it's locked up. It's people being locked up in their homes, locked out of their workplaces. It's not locking down, it's locking up. They really should feel lucky to be here, okay? So further, on the Sunday after the Sydney test, the ABC published an opinion piece titled, quote, "Allegations of abuse towards Indian cricketers at SCG is Australia's embarrassment," end quote. The piece states that, quote, "Not many professional athletes fabricate incidents of racist abuse, especially not in Australia, where the stories of Adam Goodes, Haridi Lamumba, Robert Muir and the countless others show us what happens to those who dare to complain." I know the Adam Goods thing, and I know why he was turned upon. He called a 14-year-old girl the face of, what was it, the face of racial hate in Australia, something like that. I want a verbal Adam Goods. We all know. A 14-year-old girl. I mean, does she really know what she's saying? The article goes on. On Sunday, Siraj did something as brave as any of them. Hearing verbal abuse again as he fielded on the boundary shortly before tea, he moved to the middle of the ground and reported it. Although both players said that Sunday's abuse was racist, the precise nature of Sunday's incident remains under investigation by Cricket Australia. So again, no quote regarding what was said. Eyewitnesses have come forward to say there was no basis to these allegations. The story persists with a life of its own. That Australia is a racist country and all that goes with that. Now, what is the effect of this? What is the effect of this? Let's look at the Brisbane Test. The final days of the nail-biting Brisbane Test, it was a great match. It was a great match. Struggled to attract the crowd at all. No wonder. Who wants to attend a cricket match to be called a racist without evidence? Cricket Australia, who wants to do that? All over the TV, radio, legacy media. Who wants that as a consequence of a family day out during the summer holidays? Who wants that? Who wants to go along to the cricket to have a poorly performing foreign player who can barely speak a word of English, and that was admitted by the Indian team and also by the grandstand commentators as it was happening, that Siraj has a very, very poor grasp of the English language. Who would want to go along to a test to have an allegation made, to be told that you should be lucky to be there? Why would any of these things happen? Why would anyone support? Why would anyone pay money to do that? Cricket Australia. Why would anybody do that? So what everything, okay. So I've got an idea. It is in fact the Indian cricket team that should feel lucky to be in Australia during a global pandemic. Many Australians can't get back into the country. Indian cricket team and all their entourage can. They can move around from city to city, from state to state. That's okay. They can threaten not to play a match that they're paid quite highly in luxurious circumstances to be played, even when there's no crowd there, because of the consequence of that action. That's okay. We should feel lucky to be going along. We should feel lucky for the privilege of being called racists by our national broadcaster. Right? Look, the ABC commentary team, I mean, you could say a lot about the ABC commentary team. They've had some problems, haven't they? They're kind of, like many of the ABC, a bit of a hotbed of degeneracy. They've had their own problems with members of their commentary team facing, somewhat shady and dubious allegations. I think there was a suicide a few years ago. So, I don't think that the ABC commentary team is really in a position to be lecturing ordinary Australians without any shred of evidence on their personal integrity during a test match in an event that they've paid to see in order to facilitate foreign nationals travelling to our country during a global pandemic while Australians are stuck abroad. It's the world turned on its head, that sort of logic. It's absolutely insane. Cricket Australia should feel lucky that they actually have a crowd going to cricket at all. So it doesn't stop there. If only it stopped there, but it doesn't. We've also got, where am I going for time there? That's all right. We've also got Cricket Australia's attitude to Australia Day. The Sydney Morning Herald produced an article on Friday last week, before Australia Day, Friday. Read the room, quote, read the room. Indigenous cricket star slams PM over Australia Day stance, end quote. The article says, quote, Indigenous cricketer Dan Christian has taken aim at Scott Morrison as the game's governing body hit back at the Prime Minister amid the furor over cricket's decision to dump the term Australia Day for promotional purposes. On the same day, Anthony Mundine applauded Cricket Australia's initiative and described Australia Day as, quote, a dark, dark day. Sure that's not a pun. Christian hit back at Morrison on social media, telling him to, quote, read the room, end quote. Right? The article goes on to say, quote, Morrison suggested Cricket Australia stick to cricket and stay out of politics after they gave Big Bash teams the option of switching the term Australia Day to January 26 as a mark of respect of the Indigenous community in 3 BBL games next Tuesday. And the article continues, quote, I think, this is a quote of Scott Morrison, I think a bit more focus on cricket and a bit less of focus on politics would be my message to Cricket Australia, end quote. The article goes on, he doubled down later in the day when he said it was, quote, not a particularly flash day for the people on those vessels either, in reference to the, end quote, in reference to the 1788 arrival, which drew immediate criticism from Labor and the Greens. The article goes on, I've got to get this pronunciation right. Wiradjuri cricketer who spent time with Morrison as co-captain of the Prime Minister's 11 in 2019 expressed his frustration online. Quote, read the room, Mr. Prime Minister, end quote, Christian posted. And here's the tweet. Quote, at Cricket Australia are leading the way because your government won't, full stop. There'll be millions of kids watching our at BBL games on the 26th January, and they'll see us taking a knee against racism and promoting inclusion. Full stop. Take note. Full stop. End tweet. Christian was publicly endorsed by Usman Khawaja, the first Muslim to play Test cricket for Australia, who said the PM's response was, quote, petty, end quote. So, there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, Dan Christian, I'm just not used to vowels and consonants in that order. Wiradjuri, that's right, DJ together is J. Wiradjuri cricketer, Wiradjuri. So, Dan Christian, if you know who Dan Christian is, you'll understand why I think that's incredulous. If you don't know who Dan Christian is, I just urge you right now to pause this video and Google Dan Christian. Okay, the Aboriginal cricketer. And he's publicly endorsed by Usman Khawaja. Now, I can recall when Usman Khawaja's brother was accused of terrorism offences. Now, I believe that it actually turned out that he was involved in death threats in some sort of love triangle that had sort of gone wrong, or he had some interest in some woman who wasn't interested in him. I don't know exactly. I'm not trying to verbal anything. You'll have to look that up yourselves. But I'm not sure. I think he went to jail, and I think he might still be in jail. So Usman Khawaja, from that great moral authority of being a Muslim, because that's what he's quoted as here, the first Muslim. I'm not the one making an issue of the fact that Usman Khawaja is a Muslim. That's not me. Okay, that is this article in the Sydney Morning Herald. Okay? The Sydney Morning Herald are making an issue that Usman Khawaja is a Muslim. He was a good opener, but obviously his politics suck. So I just wanted to read, because I saw on social media a bit of a viral sort of meme going around, or a picture at least, of all the different days that are reserved in the Australian calendar for Aboriginal people. Now, not all of them are official, but many, many are, and we'll go through them. Actually, I dropped all the unofficial ones. So in Australia, we have one day to celebrate the founding of our nation, one day that celebrates when the first fleet arrived, of when British civilization, when the rule of law, common law, when Her Majesty the Queen's protection was extended to Australia. The beginning of our civil and legal tradition, when the arrival of the parliamentary system of the beginnings, the day in which Australia inherited the legacy. We didn't actually inherit the institution, we inherited the legacy that later came on to be the constitutional monarchy and the parliament that we have. That began on the 26th of January 1788. And I think we should celebrate that. I mean, essentially there is nobody alive today that has been negatively impacted by that. I mean, how many, I won't get into it. So in contrast to Australia Day, that one day that we have where we should be rallying civic nationalism, should be our banner and our rallying cry around that day. On the 18th of March 2021, or on the third Thursday in March each year, we have National Close the Gap Day. Okay. On the 21st of March in Australia, we have Harmony Day. Harmony Day began in 1999, coinciding with the United Nations International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. The day was introduced by the Howard government. Getting carried away here. What are we saying about conservatives? Conserving things? Harmony Day was introduced by the Howard government to re-centralise a singular and unifying notion of Australianness within multicultural policy. I probably should have put multicultural policy on our list of the things that differentiate us between ourselves, Advancing Australia, and conservatives. We also have National Sorry Day, or the National Day of Healing, as it is called, as an annual event that has been held in Australia on the 26th of May since 1998. You'll also recall that the Howard government was in power then. We have National Reconciliation Week between the 27th of May and the 3rd of June. And on their website it says, "Thank you for your support and participation in National Reconciliation Week 2020. Reconciliation is a journey for all Australians, as individuals, families, communities, organisations, and importantly, as a nation." This is what it says on their website. "At the heart of this journey are relationships between the broader Australian community and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples." It seems to me that that is a one-way journey. That is a journey. We'll get into all of this, I think, on another day. I don't think, we just want to stick to Australia Day at the moment. Mabo Day occurs annually on the 3rd of June. It commemorates Eddie Mabo, who died in 1992, a Torres Strait Islander who campaigned for Indigenous land rights that led to a landmark decision of the Australian High Court that on the 3rd of June 1992, overturned the legal fiction of terra nullius that has characterised Australian law with regards to land and title. Now that's from Wikipedia, that quote. And I'm going to do a separate video on native title. There is so much myth, compounded upon myth, as regards native title. We have NAIDOC Week in 4th to the 11th of July 2021, and that's sponsored by the Commonwealth of Australia. We have National Aboriginal Children's Day on the 4th of August, and that is, quote, our national day dedicated to celebrating our children. And the website is plastered by logos from the Australian Government, National Indigenous Australians Agency, ABC, SBS, they're our sponsors. Then on August 9th, we have the UN Women. On August 9, UN Women joins Indigenous people around the world to commemorate the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples. So that's on the 9th of August. On the 30th of August to Saturday the 4th of September, we have Indigenous Literacy Week. And that extends to an incredible celebration of a full week of events and activities with two key celebrations. The first on Indigenous Literary Day on Wednesday, 1st September, and a gala event, according to the website, on Saturday, 4th of September. When you go to the website, you get, quote, an acknowledgement to country. The Indigenous Literary Foundation acknowledges the First Nations peoples and recognises their continuous connection to country, community and culture. We pay respect to elders past and present and emerging and honour the sharing of traditional stories passed down through generations. And there's a website, indigenousliteraryfoundation.org.au/Indigenous Literacy Day. And according to their financial report on their website, they have a budget, an income of $3.6 million almost, and their listed partners include Australia Post. Okay, Australia Post is a key partner to the Indigenous Literacy Foundation. So this ties right, I think that's the last of my days. That really ties into my earlier point about how modern conservatives at the moment are just afraid of the concept of moving away from the concept of the small government mantra. It's dead, it's nonsense. We see our institutions, Australia Post, are promoting Indigenous literacy. Now, there's nothing wrong with promoting Indigenous literacy. That's why we have schools, right? Schools. We're not going to get into policy. We're just going to stick to the main issues, and that is, you know, there's this hand wringing, this chest clutching going on about Australia Day, you know, Invasion Day. People are taking a knee at the cricket. They're called racist for going to the cricket, for the test. And at the same time, we have issues of extreme dysfunction within outback Aboriginal communities. It just goes on and on. Our concern should focus on the needs of Australian children that are living in these remote communities that are voiceless, while activists are focused not on their welfare, but on sowing cross-cultural warfare against the Australian citizen. We have lawless places where domestic violence, child abuse and other social problems run rampant, whilst our political class and institutions talk about a voice to Parliament, which is in another video, and Invasion Day, or stolen generations, as a smokescreen for inaction. Not only that, organisations like the Indigenous Literacy Foundation hold annual gala balls where their wealthy corporate donors, right? We saw the Australia Post and their bonuses of Cartier watches being handed out, right? We have these gala balls where the wealthy donors rub shoulders, sipping champagne and congratulating each other on how pure they are, how much good they're doing. It is sick, it is disgusting, and it is perverted. I'm sorry, there is no other way to put that. So, to call anybody, it's not my value system to sit around and drink champagne whilst proclaiming to solve these problems. That's not my value system, okay? That's not how it works. To call anyone who wants to keep the date of Australia Day the same, or to go to the cricket as being a racist, sick. It's just something that should really be ignored. Being a racist is not the worst thing you can be in Australia. The worst thing you can be in Australia is a fraud who uses racial warfare to disguise the real disadvantage and sexual abuse in Australia, in Aboriginal Australia, while enjoying an inner city lifestyle where you can condescend on the taxpayers that are funding that lifestyle. It's a sick, perverted joke, and I don't think we should participate in that anymore. Oh, there's so many other things we could talk about with that, but I'm conscious that I'm really going on now. So that's Australia Day, that's Cricket Australia, that's the cultural cringe that we have to overcome in a forthright manner. We have to do better for our Aboriginal citizens. We actually have a duty to ignore and to replace these people. I think that on Mabo Day I'm going to do a real deep dive into the Mabo decision, into the High Court's decision, and the fact that Aboriginal people cannot own land on their own native title lands, that they own so much land, have land, so much land under their control, and yet the Australian government's various governments are still building houses for them while their communities are in dysfunction. It makes no sense, and we're going to get into the reasons for that. I'm not blaming Aboriginal people for that, I'm blaming the system that has been created around them for that. So we've got some massive problems. Look, I think, you know, I've gone through a lot of stuff here. We're sitting at about an hour, so I'm going to end it now, but I want to thank you for watching. You can reach out via the contact details below, various social media. I want to hear from allies. I want to push the conversation forward. I want to push the conversation to the right. Yeah, thanks for watching. Again, my name's John Andrews, and g'day Aussies.